go. Okay, so welcome everybody to Monday, the first day of our next 5 days of webinars. And we're starting off on a high note, as we do with all days that we've had so far. We have 19 participants, and I know that we'll get more coming in as the time progresses. So let me just start with an acknowledgement of country, as we normally do. The Australia-ASEAN Academics Forum, Online Education During COVID-19 and Beyond, acknowledges the traditional owners of the land where this program was developed, the Palawa people of the Lutruwita Nations. We pay respect to the traditional owners and to elders past, present and emerging of the land on which all of University of Tasmania campuses stand. On behalf of the University of Tasmania, we acknowledge all countries participating in this forum and acknowledge their elders and ancestors and their legacy to us. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where our partners and participants live and work across Australia and Southeast Asia. So welcome to today. Now we're starting off, let me get all my little bits of paper in a row, with colleagues from Malaysia. So the focus of this presentation we're about to hear is pedagogical approach with an intent, focusing on interaction, time and pace during COVID-19, lessons learnt. Now today we have Latha Ravindran, Mansur Amini, Chris Lee Kamfong from UCSI University, Malaysia. And the exciting part is that while Latha is from from Education, Department of Education, Mansur Amini is from the School of Languages, Literacy and Translation, and Chris Lee Kamfong is from Applied Linguistics and Discourse. So we've got a lovely little collaboration happening. And Latha, I think you're the one who is given the gig today to present on behalf of your colleagues. So without further ado, I welcome you to your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts on this particular topic. And I'm glad to just share my findings with you. And so I would start now. This is my topic for the day. Pedagogical approach with an intent, focusing on interaction, time and pace during COVID-19, lessons learned. So of course, this stems from the fact that we have had to suddenly transit from online face-to-face to online classes, and therefore what changes have taken place. So this is focusing basically on interaction, time and pace during the COVID-19 period. So without further ado, I would go with the background of the study here. So basically, classroom discourse has undergone a huge paradigm shift since online teaching has taken the place of traditional face-to-face teaching. And as classroom interactions, time and pace are aspects of pedagogy, and online teaching has exacerbated routines of classroom teaching. Hence, the team, we have decided the patterns of interactions are worth investigating. And that would be the background of my study. So this pandemic has caused education sectors in many countries, such as South Korea, Indonesia, United States, and Malaysia, to conduct teaching and learning activities online as an act of safety precaution to prevent the spread of the virus by reducing physical contact between the educators and the student. So therefore, during the global health emergency, online learning is becoming more and more important for education. It provides the opportunity to stay in touch with peers and teachers and learn courses. So this sudden shift has caused the educators to adapt to the new norm, and this presentation will then focus on the pedagogical approaches, focusing on interactions, time and pace during online teaching. So we would also focus on the sudden paradigm shift that has taken place and what it entails in the run for the educators. So this is the current study, and this study will help educators in their capacity for decision making and autonomy. The students in turn will be responsible for their own learning, and the ownership will help them to realize their self-efficacy. So moving on, these would be the objectives of the study: to examine the pedagogical approaches used by the lecturers to address the social challenges of online teaching, and also to underscore practitioners' perspectives on interactions, time and pace to facilitate collaborative learning. So, of course, during online teaching, the most important thing we noticed is the social challenges in online teaching that included how students interacted with the lecturers and how lecturers had difficulties interacting with the students, and also their perspectives on how it has helped them to find their own ways and means to facilitate collaborative learning during these challenging times. So this would be the research methodology. The research design was a qualitative research, and the sampling method was a convenience sampling method. So we chose about 8 lecturers from private universities, and data collection was through classroom observation. So it's again not a face-to-face observation, but through Teams. And also we did semi-structured interviews through Microsoft Teams, and the data was analyzed thematically. So based on this, we came up with 4 main findings for this. The first one was opportunities for change, and the second one was instructional support and online resources. The third was building rapport, and the fourth was the perceived anxieties. So these were the 4 major findings that we came up with for these studies. So I would go on to elaborate on each of the findings and also the perspectives we have gathered. So the first one would be, of course, opportunities for change. So the readiness of the educator in adapting to online teaching was a major challenge for educators, because in our university and also elsewhere, there are lecturers who were not very adept with using technology, and they were using Teams, majority of them for the first time. So the readiness in adapting to online teaching was a major challenge for educators, because they had to go quickly onto Teams, and therefore that was quite challenging for the educators, because they were not very sure about using the pedagogical tools, and they were not really used like talking to the screen most of the time, as the educators described. So that was a major change for them. And the second was that the lecturers valued the time and pace of their lessons and allowed the students to adopt to the online mode of teaching. So with this sudden transition also came about learners who were not really willing to go online, and who had many concerns going online, and therefore the lecturers had to value their time and pace of their lessons, so that students would be able to adapt to this online mode of teaching. And how they did this is they used online databases, they used videos, and also they used chat groups to help the students to cope with the pace of the lessons. Because obviously, considering we have learners with different proficiencies and at different levels in one class, the pace had to be adjusted, especially so when it was during an online platform, and therefore the lecturers used various online databases as well as chat groups and videos to help the students so that students can cope with the pace of the lessons. So moving on still with the opportunities for change, educators who are not experienced in the use of internet technology would find it difficult in adapting to online teaching as compared to educators who are experienced using internet technology. So obviously, lecturers who were in teaching mass comm subjects, they were more fast in adapting to the online mode, whereas other lecturers were struggling to grapple with the new change and adapting to using this online classes. Similarly, students also faced challenges in coping with online lessons because we found they lost their attention quite frequently, and it was a challenge for the educators to keep their attention all the time, considering it was the online classes. And lecturers also, they provided necessary support to increase students' awareness of their responsibility to engage in reflection and also enhance their capacity for decision making and to be autonomous learners. So nowhere as in now, it was more important for students to be aware of their own responsibility. So we had to repeatedly tell them that they are also responsible for their own learning, and they had to make a decision and be autonomous learners. So in a way, there was a lot of autonomy given to them to take charge of their own learning and also to enhance their capacity for decision making, because the whole collaboration, online collaboration was quite different, and the dynamics of the online classes were also different because we had students who are willing to participate and we had students who were very unwilling to participate, even to turn on their cameras, and therefore the lecturers had to come up with enough support and also to make them aware of their own responsibility and let them take charge for their own learning to be autonomous learners. So as one educator says, it was a great opportunity for us to explore various options, but at the same time, it was quite chaotic for the first week adapting to the new norms. So again, another educator opines, we had to make decisions on the spot which platform to use and how to get students to participate in the class, because obviously they were prepared for a particular platform or to do a certain type of activity, only to find that only some students were willing to participate. So that entailed making on-the-spot decisions or switching to other kinds of interactions so that we could get as many students to participate. So another lecturer says, I felt like I'm talking to myself, and that was quite funny and frustrating at the same time. So majority of them also talked about this, where they felt they were talking to themselves because we had students who were reluctant to turn on their cameras, and therefore it was like lecturers talking to the screen most of the time, unless it was a presentation and they were forced to turn on their camera. So that was a challenge. And moving on to the second finding, we have instructional support, how the lecturers provided them with instructional support. So the students were briefed on the additional support extended to them, and at each stage of work, they were guided. So every lecturer whom I interviewed had a specific group chat whereby the lecturers would constantly post articles for students to read and also give them reminders and motivate them and send them YouTube video links, so on and so forth. So that was an additional platform for them to read besides the classroom hours. So additional support was also rendered by providing them with videos, chat forums, and websites apart from readings assigned to them. And the lecturers also used both Microsoft Teams as well as CN. CN is course networking, that is the normal platform, the official platform where the students would go in, log in to find the materials related to their classes. So the lecturers had to simultaneously post materials and videos in both Teams as well as in CN. CN is our course networking in order to capture again students' attention. So the lecturers were aware of the decision-making autonomy and the impact it will have on online teaching. And the intent was to allow students to develop their social skills and also to allow them to do their interactions. And so online discussions were encouraged. They also allowed sharing of screens, and students were asked to draw, write, and exchange notes to share their ideas. So some students had a thinking that asking them to share PowerPoint slides was kind of a formal interaction. So the lecturers had to allow other forms of sharing by students. For example, one lecturer who was teaching literature allowed students to draw and explain. Like, for example, if the topic for the day was on the themes or the plot or characterization, they could come up with interesting aspects, and also they had asked them to draw the characters and explain the characteristics and then relating it to the plot and the theme. So there were not just one way for students to share their thoughts and also their discussions, but they were allowed other kind of sharings. Some were allowed to share their screens, some were allowed to draw and exchange notes, and they also had this meeting rooms assigned to them so that they had their own discussions, and then they would join the main platform to discuss what they had during their online meetings, right? So moving on, Hobbes recommends that this self-development process be encouraged in any field whose members work with people. Evidently, Chuang pointed out that educators who already has knowledge and experience in using internet technologies face very few difficulties. And so the lecturers also assigned the materials synchronously. So that was for instructional support. And this is one of the raw data the lecturer says. The support by the institution was also very important. And we had trainings on rotational basis, and the IT department swiftly came into action. So the first week that the online teaching happened, the very next day, the IT department had come up with batches of people where the instructors were having training sessions on teaching them how to use Teams, as well as teaching them how to share screens, post materials, so on and so forth. And these trainings were conducted throughout the day on a daily basis for about 1 week, until all the lecturers were more or less able to gain a footing on how to use the Microsoft Teams. Right? So one educator recalls, it was frustrating for those with no knowledge in IT skills, and we had no choice but call our friends to teach us many things. So apart from the instructional support provided by the IT department, educators also had their own support group, and the lecturers actually had a video call to teach others who were less familiar with these features. And that was also another instructional support that was given to the lecturers who had to face this sudden who had to internet we do also have scholarship students who were aiming for their A's, and they were quite worried about this sudden transition. So as another author discussed, report from the perspective of classroom effectiveness, arguing that effective classrooms are task-oriented, but also characterized by mutual respect and rapport. So at this stage, the lecturers tried to build a connection with the students, which of course is easily done when there is a face-to-face interaction, but doing classes online, then they had to go the extra mile to build a connection with the staff, even by having a small talk before their classes started and asking about the situations in their own country and how they are coping with the sudden changes and also the online classes. All right, so moving on, the students develop positive attitude towards learning after the instructors built rapport with them, and this was established by communicating with them constantly. And there was also a group chat created to post updates on the class as well as the reading materials. So all these lecturers, there was a class monitor in the WhatsApp group who would also be responsible to act as a connecting point between the lecturers and the students. And the lecturers themselves gave a lot of rapport and gave them a lot of materials to read so that the students were not left behind. And this kind of connecting, and even sometimes they shared small stories of success that help the students to maintain the positive attitude during this online learning. And real-time feedback, as well as allowing peer interaction to take place, also help to build connection with the students. So obviously from the first to the introduction classes, throughout the 14 weeks that they had classes, there was real-time feedback given to students, and somehow that allowed interactions to take place. Moving on, even being humorous and exchanging pleasantries was also part of the support system to build rapport. And they had sometimes online games and sharing, exchanging pleasantries so that the lessons were not too tedious, because our lessons are usually for 1.5 hours. So they also created predictable routines and structures to allow students to settle with online classes. So by routines and structures is like having a fixed routine, and how is the structure, which was all very well communicated to the students before the start of the class. And as far as possible, the lecturers try to stick to this routine and structure so that it does not disrupt the students, and so that they are also able to settle very well with the online classes. So that included providing the information they are required to know, including assessments, and also having a regular routine to avoid any surprises, because that would have disrupted the students' emotions and also the participation in classes. So moving on, they were able to connect classroom experiences to the real world outside, as they discussed pertain to their experience. And they were also asked to relate every issue discussed to their experiences and draw examples from it. So for example, in a writing class, the students were even asked to encourage to bring things like oranges, flowers, fruits, or leaves, and then asked to smell, touch, feel, and then asked to write a descriptive paragraph about it. So by doing that, they were able to connect through experiences, and that kind of compensated for the lack of face-to-face interactions. And also the lecturers maintained the tone of interactions in a very friendly manner compared to the traditional face-to-face classes, because in a traditional face-to-face classes, sometimes the lecturers tend to be more strict in terms of participations, or in chiding students who do not participate. But in this case, they were quite friendly, and they went the extra mile to encourage them to participate in class. So the participants in this study also express on the importance of building rapport, as we felt a greater need to reach out to our students as many were lost in this transition. We had quickly formed chat groups to interact and also to stay connected. So that was for the third finding. And the fourth one was related to perceived anxieties. So the students' participation during online class was a huge concern with educators, because we do have students with various levels as well as competencies, and therefore that was a huge concern for the educators. So a majority of them were not willing to turn on the camera, and they cited connectivity issues which couldn't be verified by the lecturers at all times. And some weak students could not be monitored because of the limitations with the online classes. So in a quantitative study by Bailey and Lee in South Korea, the findings show that educators that are inexperienced with utilizing internet technology encounter more challenges during online teaching. For instance, if a student faces technical issues, an educator that is not experienced with internet technology would find it hard to assist the student, as they are not familiar with how to deal with the device and the functions. So this required the educator to identify the best possible platform and also resources for online teaching. And since the MCO has been implemented in Malaysia, the internet usage has increased, which resulted in slow internet connection speed, as the internet users are competing for the internet data resources. So this was also one of the concerns the lecturers faced, and they were worried for the weak students in the class, because the majority of the students did not want to turn on their camera, citing bandwidth issues, and therefore the lecturers were also worried to really see whether the students were online. Of course, they could see their names on the platform, but how much they were participating was really a challenge for the lecturers. All right. So this was a learning curve for educators as well as the students. The requirements of online teaching was challenging, and the instructors had to initially learn and guide the students from the beginning and at every stage until completion. So it was also a challenge to have the students to accept and maintain ownership, as well as to get them interact in class, because sometimes the students do tend to leave everything to the lecturers, to find resources, to get them to explain. And so this was also a great challenge the educators faced, to get the students to have ownership, to have them to learn that they are also responsible for their own learning and for interactions in the classroom. So they resorted to even calling them by names from the attendance list, to make sure that every student participated in the classroom, so that no one student gets left out in terms of interactions in the classroom. So the class was paced according to the dynamics of the class, and the slow learners were allowed to study on a self-pace monitored by the lecturers. And the lecturers valued the time and pace and also allowed the students to adopt the online mode of teaching. So the students, some of the weaker students were allowed on a self-pace and to read or to understand a certain topic for the day, and the lecturers monitored them through their WhatsApp groups. So this is how the lecturers manage the learning. And so now I will move on to the implications of the study. So the effectiveness will depend on the lecturer's preparedness as well as the institutional support. Most importantly, the educators will also have to adapt to the challenges in online teaching and consider the contextual considerations as well as the subjects they teach, because some subjects were more inclined to practical sessions, whereas others were heavily content-oriented subjects. So they will have to adapt accordingly based on the nature of the subject. And the practical considerations such as the duration of the class and the learner's preference as well as the institutional support they receive is also one of the implications. So the end date of the pandemic has yet to be determined. So educational institutions around the world have decided to use available technical resources to create online learning materials for students in all academic fields. On a wider scale, these will include the technical preparation of the National Distance Education Plan, the preparation of courses and support content, the preparation of home and teaching learning support, and also the preparation of monitoring and evaluation. So even when students would come back to normal face-to-face, a lot of things would have changed in terms of how the preparation of courses and how the content, the support content would be uploaded or would be disseminated to the students in the future, and also how we would constantly monitor and evaluate the students in the future when things come back to face-to-face. So finally, my conclusion would be the educators learned to cope well and understood the implications of using time and pace to have conducive social interactions in an online class. Evidently, the experienced lecturers with an edge in technology were able to adapt to the changes quickly. So that would be the end of my presentation. And these are the profiles of my co-presenters, Dr. Mansoor and Ms. Chris. So these would be the references. All right. So I would be glad to answer any questions that you may have for me.